My boss fired me live on a company-wide video call in front of 120 people. He smirked and told the entire staff I was never qualified anyway. I did not cry. I did not beg for my job. I just logged off quietly. 20 minutes later, Human Resources called him into a closed room. When he came out, his face was the color of wet ash, and he could not look anyone in the eye. He had no idea that clicking end meeting on me was the start of his own professional execution. Before I tell you what was waiting in that Human Resources inbox, take a second to hit like and subscribe if you have ever dealt with a toxic boss. And drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from today. Let us get into it. It was Monday morning at 8 sharp. I sat at my home office desk, sipping black coffee, logged into the all-hands meeting. 120 squares illuminated my monitor. Bradley Pierce, our Vice President of Operations, was leading the quarterly update. He wore his usual custom-tailored suit, leaning back in his leather chair with that signature arrogance. I am Chloe Hastings, 31 years old, Director of Data Analytics. Or at least I was. Bradley paused mid-sentence on a slide about operational efficiency. He stared directly into his webcam. "We are making some structural changes today," he announced. His voice echoed through the headset. "Chloe Hastings is no longer with the company effective immediately. Due to consistent poor performance and a lack of technical aptitude, we are terminating her contract." My screen froze for a fraction of a second. Then the chat window exploded. Dozens of direct messages flooded my screen from coworkers. "Did he just say that? Is this a joke? Did he just fire you?" I watched Bradley smile. A tight, victorious little grin. He signaled the tech team, and right before my eyes, the green active dots next to my internal company access portals turned gray. Access denied. He expected a scene. He thrived on public humiliation. For 3 years, Bradley built his career by taking my analytics reports, stripping my name off the header, and presenting them to the board as his own strategic vision. He wanted me to unmute my microphone panic and plead for a second chance in front of the entire company. I reached for my mouse. I unmuted myself. The frantic typing in the chat stopped. 120 people held their breath. Bradley raised an eyebrow, waiting for the breakdown. "Are you certain about this decision, Bradley?" My voice was steady. "Level," he scoffed. "The decision is final, Chloe. You can expect your severance paperwork by noon." I nodded once. Understood. I moved the cursor and clicked Leave Meeting. The gallery of shocked faces vanished, replaced by my quiet desktop wallpaper. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. I did not feel humiliated. I felt a deep, chilling sense of calm. Bradley thought he had just eliminated a nuisance who refused to play office politics. He had no idea he just severed the only tether keeping him out of federal court. I opened my personal email account. I had drafted a message the night before, guided by a legal strategy that would soon tear Bradley down. I attached a single encrypted file. The recipient was the head of Human Resources, with the chief executive officer copied. I watched the progress bar turn green. Delivered. The countdown had begun. To understand why Bradley decided to publicly execute my career on a Monday morning, you have to look at what he tried to steal from me exactly 48 hours earlier. Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. The glass walls of my office offered zero privacy, which was exactly how management liked it. I was running a final stress test on Project Apex. My fingers flew across the keyboard, watching the logistics simulation optimize shipping routes in real time. This software was my brainchild. I spent 11 months coding it from the ground up, sacrificing weekends and holidays. The algorithm was designed to predict supply chain bottlenecks before they happened, effectively saving the company $15 million a year in wasted overhead. It was brilliant, clean, and entirely mine. The heavy glass door swung open. Bradley marched in. He did not knock. He never knocked. He dropped a thick, leather-bound portfolio directly onto my keyboard, forcing my hands to snatch back. "I need the master key for Apex," he said. His tone was casual, yet laced with an undeniable command. "Transfer the source code to my secure drive by 5 today." I stared at the leather portfolio, then up at his tailored suit. I pushed my chair back. "For what purpose, Bradley?" "The software is still in the testing phase. I am presenting the initial findings to the board next month." He laughed, a short, breathy sound that echoed in the small office. "You are not presenting anything, Chloe." I am. The chief executive officer wants a solution for the quarterly deficit. I told him my team developed a groundbreaking predictive model. I am pitching it to the executive board on Monday afternoon. I just need the repository access to run the demo. He said my team. He meant himself. For 3 years, I watched this man steal the credit for every data model I built. He would change the title slide, add his signature, and collect the annual performance bonus. But Project Apex was different. It was not just a spreadsheet. It was an entire proprietary ecosystem. No, I said. Bradley stopped adjusting his cuffs. He looked at me, tilting his head as if he misheard. Excuse me. I am not giving you the master key, I replied, keeping my voice even. Project Apex is not ready for a board presentation. More importantly, it is my architecture. I will present it when the time is right. He leaned across my desk, placing both hands flat on the glass surface. He invaded my space using his height to cast a shadow over my monitor. Let us get something straight, Chloe. You are a mid-level director. You sit in this cubicle, you type your little codes, and you hand them over to me. That is your job. Apex belongs to the company, which means it belongs to me. Hand over the access right now. He was wrong. He was factually and legally incorrect, but he was too arrogant to realize it. I had coded Project Apex entirely on my personal laptop using my own private server outside of company hours. I never used company internet or company hardware to build the core engine. I knew the corporate intellectual property bylaws better than the legal department did. The code stays with me until the official launch, I said. I met his stare without blinking. His jaw tightened. The charming executive mask slipped, revealing the bully underneath. You think you are irreplaceable. You think because you understand algorithms you hold the cards. Let me educate you. I have the power to ruin you in this industry. I can make one phone call and ensure you never touch a dataset in this city again. He stood up, grabbing the leather portfolio. You have 48 hours. By Monday morning, I want that master key in my inbox. If I do not get it, you can pack your desk. He turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open for everyone on the floor to see. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a massive surge of adrenaline. The ultimatum was set. I packed my bag and left the building. The drive home was a blur of traffic and gray skies. My phone rang through the car audio system. The caller identification showed my mother, Sylvia. I answered, hoping for a distraction. Instead, I got another battleground. Chloe, my mother, started skipping any greeting. I was just speaking with Patricia Pierce at the country club. Bradley is her nephew, you know. She mentioned he is spearheading a massive new software project at your firm. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. He is not spearheading anything, Mom. He is trying to steal my work. I built that software. He just threatened to fire me if I do not surrender the code. I expected outrage. I expected my mother to defend her daughter. Instead, she let out a long, disappointed sigh. Chloe, why must you always be so difficult? I switched lanes, my heart pounding. Difficult. He is stealing $15 million worth of intellectual property from me. You are an employee, she countered, her voice dripping with condescension. You need to understand your place. The Pierce family is incredibly influential. They sit on the board of the hospital. They fund the arts gala. If you just play nice and let Bradley take the lead, he could open doors for us. Do not ruin this because of your stubborn pride. Give him what he wants. She did not care about my late nights. She did not care about the dark circles under my eyes or the years of education I put into my craft. She only cared about her proximity to wealth and status. To her, my career was just a bargaining chip for her next country club luncheon. I will handle it my way, Mom. I ended the call. The silence in the car felt heavier than before. It was the crushing realization that if I fell, no one in my bloodline would catch me. They would step over me to shake hands with the man who pushed me. I got back to my apartment and ordered takeout I could not eat. The evening stretched into a tense, quiet night. I sat on my couch with my personal laptop open, reviewing the security protocols on my private server. If Bradley wanted that code, he would not just wait for me to hand it over. He was a predator, and predators do not wait for permission. At 11:45 that night, my screen flashed red. A high-priority security alert popped up on my dashboard. Someone was attempting to breach the firewall of my external server. It was not a random automated scan. It was a targeted, relentless attack. Someone was actively trying to crack the encryption guarding the Project Apex repository. I sat up straight, my fingers flying across the keys. I initiated a reverse trace protocol. The intruder was throwing thousands of password combinations at my server every second. But they were sloppy. They assumed I was just a regular employee with basic security knowledge. They did not realize they were trying to hack a cybersecurity specialist who built her own infrastructure. I watched the digital assault hit my firewall and bounce off. I typed in a command to unmask the source IP address. The system processed the data, tracing the digital footprint back through the internet service provider. The address resolved on my screen. I stared at the location data, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The attack was not originating from a random hacker in a basement. The IP address belonged to the corporate headquarters of my company. I dug deeper, isolating the specific floor and suite router. It traced directly back to the executive suite. Bradley Pierce was sitting in his office at midnight on a Friday, trying to digitally rob me blind. He told me I had 48 hours to think about it. It was a lie. He was already trying to take it by force. I took a screenshot of the IP log, timestamped and verified. I downloaded the full intrusion report and backed it up to 3 separate encrypted hard drives. He wanted a war over this software. He just handed me the first weapon. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text message lit up the screen. It was Marcus, my brother-in-law, the only person in my family who actually understood corporate warfare. The message read, "Are you coming to family dinner tomorrow night? We need to catch up." I looked at the hacked IP log on my screen. I picked up my phone and replied, "Yes, and I am bringing my laptop. We have a problem." Saturday evening arrived with the suffocating scent of roasted lamb and my mother burning sage in the dining room. I sat at the long mahogany table inside my parents' house, tracing the rim of my wine glass. The crystal caught the light, but the atmosphere in the room felt heavy and suffocating. My father sat at the head of the table, cutting his meat in silent agreement with whatever my mother Sylvia was saying. And what Sylvia was saying, as usual, felt like a deliberate strategy to dismantle my self-esteem. "Did you hear about Jessica Pierce?" my mother asked, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "Patricia told me at the club today. Jessica just got a massive promotion at your company. They named her strategic advisor to the executive board." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. Jessica Pierce was Bradley Pierce's own cousin. She was 24 years old. She held a degree in art history and had spent the last 2 years running a failed lifestyle blog. The idea that she was stepping into a strategic advisor role at a logistics data firm was not just absurd. It was a textbook case of corporate nepotism. "She does not have a background in data analytics, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level. "She does not even know how to run a basic pivot table." My mother waved her hand, dismissing my logic the same way she dismissed my entire career. "You are too rigid, Chloe. That is your problem. You think everything is about coding and numbers. Jessica understands networking. She understands grace. She knows how to cultivate relationships with the right people. Patricia said her starting salary is $150,000, and she gets her own corner office." My jaw tightened. I managed teams, built predictive models, and generated revenue. I earned less than that after a decade in the industry. Bradley was funneling company funds to his uneducated cousin while simultaneously threatening to fire me for refusing to hand over a $15 million software ecosystem. "You should be taking notes from Jessica." My mother continued, oblivious to the storm brewing across the table. "Bradley is a rising star. If you just stopped being so stubborn and learned to play the game, he might bring you along. You lack ambition, Chloe. You sit in the background while people like Jessica secure their futures." I placed my fork down. The ceramic clinked against the glass. I was about to say something I could never take back when the front door opened. The heavy footsteps in the foyer belonged to Marcus Thorne. Marcus was 34 years old, an African-American man with a brilliant mind and an intimidating presence. He was married to my older sister, Sarah. Marcus was a corporate compliance lawyer. He made partner at his firm by dissecting corrupt corporate structures and exposing executives who thought they were above the law. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his posture immaculate, carrying a leather briefcase that felt like an extension of his own authority. Sarah followed closely behind him, offering a warm smile that briefly thawed the frost in the dining room. "Sorry we are late," Marcus said, taking the seat next to me. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and glanced around the table. His dark eyes scanned the room, picking up on the tension instantly. Marcus read rooms for a living. He noticed my untouched food and my mother's tight, judgmental posture. Sylvia wasted no time dragging him into her narrative. We were just discussing business, Marcus. I was telling Chloe she needs to be more like Jessica Pierce. Jessica just secured a wonderful advisory role through her cousin Bradley. It is all about knowing how to navigate corporate leadership. Marcus picked up his water glass. He did not smile. He looked directly at my mother. Hiring an unqualified relative for a six-figure advisory role is not navigating leadership, Sylvia. It is a compliance violation. If the board of directors audited that payroll addition, Bradley Pierce would be investigated for misappropriation of company funds. The dining room went dead silent. My father cleared his throat suddenly, finding his lamb very interesting. My mother flushed red, her grip on her wine glass whitening her knuckles. She hated when Marcus brought legal reality into her fantasy world of high society gossip. "Well," my mother stammered, "they are a very prominent family. I am sure the company signed off on it." Marcus turned his attention to me, ignoring her weak defense. "You look like you have not slept in 3 days, Chloe. What is going on?" I looked at Sarah, then at Marcus. "I need 10 minutes of your time," I said quietly. "In the study. Now." Marcus did not ask questions. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, excused himself from the table, and followed me down the hall. I locked the heavy oak door of my father's study behind us. The sound of the deadbolt clicking shut felt like sealing a vault. I opened my bag and pulled out my personal laptop, setting it on the desk. I told Marcus everything. I told him about the Friday afternoon ambush. I detailed how Bradley stormed into my office and demanded the master key for Project Apex. I explained the 48-hour ultimatum and his threat to destroy my career. Marcus stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his chest, processing the data without showing a sliver of emotion. Then I opened the laptop and pulled up the security logs from my private server. "And then this happened at midnight," I said, pointing to the screen. Marcus leaned over the desk. His eyes narrowed as he read the red lines of text showing the brute force hacking attempt. He traced the numbers tracking the reverse IP address. He saw the origin point, the corporate executive suite, Bradley Pierce. Marcus let out a low, humorless exhale. He pulled out the chair and sat down in front of the laptop. "Walk me through the architecture of Project Apex," he demanded, his voice shifting into a cold, professional cadence. "Did you code any part of this software on a company computer?" "No," I answered quickly. "I knew the rules. I used my personal machine." "Did you use company servers to host the repository?" "Never. I rented a private external server under my own name." "Did you write the code during business hours?" I shook my head. "Nights and weekends only. I have the commit timestamps to prove it. Every single line of code was pushed outside of the standard 9 to 5 window." Marcus opened a new tab and asked me to pull up my original employment contract. I navigated to my digital archives and opened the document. Marcus scrolled past the standard non-disclosure agreements and stopped at the intellectual property assignment clause. He read the legal jargon in silence for a long minute. The room felt stripped of air. I watched his eyes scan the paragraphs, searching for the trapdoor. "Your mother is wrong about you," Marcus finally said, keeping his eyes on the screen. "You do not lack ambition. You are just surrounded by people too ignorant to recognize genius." He tapped the screen. "Look at this clause right here, Chloe. Your company uses a boilerplate intellectual property agreement. It states that any invention created using company resources, company time, or company trade secrets belongs to them. But because you firewalled your development process, Project Apex is your sole proprietary intellectual property. Bradley Pierce demanding that code under threat of termination is not a management dispute. It is corporate extortion." I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. "But he is going to fire me on Monday if I do not hand it over. He is presenting my software to the board as his own." Marcus leaned back in the chair. The analytical gears in his head were spinning. He looked at the hacking log again. "The extortion is bad enough," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "But this hacking attempt changes the entire game." He pointed a long finger at the IP address. "Bradley did not just threaten you. He used a corporate network to launch a cyberattack against a private server to steal intellectual property. That is a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It is a federal crime. And by using the company network to commit that crime, he just made the entire corporation liable for his actions." My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the screen, the reality of the situation crashing over me. Bradley thought he was dealing with a frightened subordinate. He did not realize he had just handed me the legal leverage to bankrupt him and the firm. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do I send him a warning? Do I go to Human Resources on Monday morning?" Marcus stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, his expression hardening into something terrifying and brilliant, the kind of look that made corrupt executives sweat in deposition rooms. "You do nothing," Marcus said. I blinked in confusion. "Nothing." Marcus looked at me, his eyes cold and chillingly calm. "Do not hand over the master key. Do not reply to his messages. Do not warn Human Resources. You let him log into that morning meeting. You let him feel powerful, and you let him fire you on Monday morning. It will be his own death sentence." Monday morning arrived long before the sun. I woke up at exactly 5 o'clock. My phone was vibrating against the nightstand wood. It was not a scheduled alarm. It was a steady, rhythmic buzzing that signaled an avalanche of automated alerts. I reached over the screen, brightness searing my tired eyes in the dark bedroom. 27 new notifications waited on the lock screen. The first was an automated message from the commercial building management system. It stated my physical keycard access to the downtown office had been revoked. The second was a security bounce-back email. I tried to open my corporate inbox application. The loading circle spun for a bare second before a gray error screen appeared. The text read, "Account suspended. Please contact your system administrator." I sat up, pushing the heavy blanket off my shoulders. The chill of the early morning apartment hit my skin. I navigated to the internal employee portal using my mobile web browser. When I typed my name into the directory search bar, the page returned 0 results. I no longer existed in the company database. Bradley Pierce had not waited for normal business hours. He utilized his loyalists in the information technology department to execute a digital coup while the rest of the city was still asleep. It was a classic corporate isolation tactic. Cut off the target communication lines, revoke their physical access, and erase their identity before they even have a chance to put on their shoes. He wanted to ensure I had no opportunity to download internal files, contact Human Resources, or rally support from my data team before the morning meeting. He wanted me blind, deaf, and entirely defenseless. Any other employee might have panicked. Most people would be dialing their manager in tears, pleading with the technology help desk to fix a presumed glitch, or rushing to the office to pound on the glass lobby doors. I did none of those things. I walked into the kitchen, poured cold, filtered water into the coffee maker, and turned it on. The apartment was dead silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. I carried a mug of black coffee to my home office and opened my personal laptop. The screen cast a pale, icy light across my wooden desk. Marcus had predicted this exact maneuver during our conversation in my father's study. He warned me that corporate predators operate on intimidation and the element of surprise. They rely on the victim losing their composure, making mistakes, and begging for mercy. But I had spent the last decade analyzing data patterns, identifying anomalies, and building predictive models. I did not operate on fear. I operated on cold, calculated logic. And logically, Bradley was walking blindly into a trap he helped build. I accessed my private server. This was the external vault where the true architecture of Project Apex lived. Bradley assumed the software was a static file he could simply present on a projector, like a basic slideshow. He was a man who wore expensive suits and threw around buzzwords, but he did not understand the underlying mechanics of what I had created. Project Apex was not a spreadsheet. It was a living, breathing algorithm. It required constant authentication to process the massive logistical datasets it consumed from global shipping networks, warehouse labor logs, and fuel consumption trackers. I opened the root command terminal. Lines of green text cascaded down the black screen, reflecting in my eyes. I initiated a sequence I had coded months ago as a basic security measure, but now it would serve a much more lethal purpose. It was a dead man switch. I carefully modified the parameters, linking the core processing engine directly to a biometric authentication ping from my personal mobile device. I set a 12-hour countdown timer. If the software did not receive my specific fingerprint verification by the end of that window, the primary simulation engine would initiate a hard shutdown. It would not delete the code, which would be considered destruction of corporate property and open me up to legal liability. Instead, it would scramble the predictive models, locking the interface behind an impenetrable encryption wall. The $15 million supply chain optimization program would instantly devolve into a chaotic display of error codes and useless gibberish. Bradley intended to demo this software to the chief executive officer and the top-tier investment partners at 2:00 this afternoon. He planned to take the stage steal my years of hard work and secure his promotion to the executive board. By modifying this code, I ensured that when he stood in front of that boardroom and pressed start, the entire system would collapse right in front of the most powerful people in the firm. He would be holding the steering wheel of a car with no engine. I hit the enter key. The terminal confirmed the execution with a soft digital chime. The kill switch was armed and ticking. I closed the terminal and took another sip of my coffee. The digital clock in the corner of my screen moved to 6:30. I spent the next hour preparing my physical workspace for the incoming slaughter. I cleared my desk of any company-branded notebooks, pens, or folders. If I was going away, I would leave no trace of their corporate identity in my personal sanctuary. I walked into my bathroom and turned on the shower. The hot water helped loosen the tension tightening my neck and shoulders. I thought about my mother, Sylvia, and her desperate need to appease the wealthy elite. I thought about how she ordered me to bow down to a thief just to secure a country club invitation. Her voice echoed in my head, telling me to know my place. I let the water wash that toxicity away. I knew my place perfectly well. My place was at the top of the chessboard, watching the pawns move into my line of fire. I dressed with intention. I chose a sharp-tailored navy blouse, securing my hair in a neat professional knot. I applied a subtle layer of makeup, ensuring my face looked rested, alert, and entirely unbothered. If Bradley was going to publicly execute my career on a video feed, I would look immaculate for the occasion. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing red eyes or messy hair or hearing a trembling voice. I wanted my composure to haunt him. The morning light slowly crept through my window blinds, painting strips of pale yellow across the hardwood floor. I sat back down at my desk, arranging my posture to exude absolute confidence. I tested my webcam, making sure the lighting was even and the background was clean and distraction-free. I was ready. At 7:55, my phone vibrated on the desk surface one final time. It was a text message to my personal number. I unlocked the screen. The sender was Bradley. The message was brief, dripping with unearned confidence and petty malice. It read, "Join the Zoom. Watch me take everything you have." I read the words twice. He was so certain of his victory. He believed he had cornered me, stripped me of my weapons, locked me out of the building, and left me with nothing but the clothes on my back. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet data analyst who sat in the corner cubicle. He forgot that I was the one who built the entire arena he was currently standing in. He was a trespasser in my domain, bragging about stealing a crown that was rigged to explode. I set the phone down next to my keyboard. A cold, quiet smile touched the corners of my mouth. I opened my personal calendar, located the forwarded meeting invite, and clicked the link to join the execution. I clicked Leave Meeting, and the screen went black. The silence in my apartment returned thick and immediate. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had just been fired. I had just been humiliated in front of 120 people by a man who had stolen my work. Yet the devastation I was supposed to feel was entirely absent. In its place was a sharp clinical focus. My phone lit up instantly. The lock screen became a waterfall of text messages. Some were from confused colleagues offering quiet condolences or asking if I was okay. I swiped those away. The others were from Bradley Inner Circle, the middle managers and sycophants who trailed behind him, eager for crumbs of his unearned power. One message from Greg, a junior analyst who had spent the last year trying to take my job, read, "Guess the best coder in the room could not code her way out of a pink slip. Pack your desk, Hastings." Another message from an unknown number simply said, "Goodbye and good riddance. Do not forget to leave the coffee mug." They were vultures circling what they believed was a carcass. They thought this was a high school cafeteria drama, a simple matter of the popular crowd exiling the nerd. They did not grasp the corporate and legal machinery that was currently grinding into motion. I placed my phone face down on the desk. Let them feast on their petty victories. Their celebrations were about to be cut violently short. I turned my attention back to my laptop monitor. Before logging into the morning meeting, I had sent a secure encrypted message to David. David was a senior systems architect, a quiet man who rarely spoke in meetings but observed everything. He was one of the few people in the building who understood the sheer scale of what I had built with Project Apex. He was also the only person who knew the true depth of Bradley incompetence. My message to David had been simple: record the entire session. Do not stop the capture when I leave. 10 minutes after I exited the call, a secure file transfer link appeared in my personal email inbox. The sender was David. I clicked the link, downloaded the file, and opened the video player. The recording picked up exactly where I had vanished from the grid. The gallery of 120 faces remained on the screen. The chat window, previously explosive, had gone entirely silent. The shock of a live public termination had paralyzed the company. Bradley Pierce leaned back in his leather chair. He adjusted his silk tie, the picture of a corporate conqueror. He allowed the silence to stretch, relishing the fear he had just injected into the virtual room. "This is what leadership looks like," his posture screamed. "Dissent will not be tolerated. We had to make that difficult choice," Bradley announced, his voice smooth and practice dripping with fake regret. "We need innovators on this team. We need forward thinkers who are committed to the future of this firm. And speaking of the future, I want to pivot to something incredibly exciting." He shared his screen. The company logo appeared, followed by a sleek, minimalist title slide. The text read, "Project Apex, The Future of Predictive Logistics," by Bradley Pierce and Jessica Pierce. I watched the screen, my jaw clenching. He had actually done it. He had put his name and the name of his unqualified art history majoring cousin on the title slide of my software. It was an act of theft, so brazen, so breathtakingly stupid, that I almost laughed. For the last few months, Bradley continued, his voice swelling with pride. "Jessica and I have been working late into the night. We saw a critical inefficiency in our supply chain mapping, and we decided to build a solution from scratch. Project Apex is our brainchild. It is a proprietary algorithm that will revolutionize how we process freight data." He moved to the next slide, displaying a series of complex graphs and predictive models. The irony was physically painful. He was gesturing to data visualizations he did not understand, explaining algorithms he could not code, and claiming ownership of a system he could not even turn on without my fingerprint. "I see the Chief Executive Officer is on the call," Bradley said, looking directly into his camera. "Sir, I am thrilled to announce that Apex is fully operational. Jessica and I have ironed out the final bugs. We are ready to run a live demonstration for the global logistics partners this afternoon at 2 o'clock. This software will secure the $15 million contract renewal. It is a game changer." The Chief Executive Officer unmuted his microphone. "Excellent work, Bradley. I look forward to the demonstration. This is exactly the kind of proactive innovation we need." Bradley smiled, a wide, triumphant grin. "Thank you, sir. We will not let you down." The recording ended. The screen went dark. I sat in my quiet home office, letting the weight of what I had just witnessed settle over me. Bradley had just stood in front of the entire company, including the CEO, and explicitly claimed creative and technical ownership of Project Apex. He had formally declared it as the intellectual property of himself and his cousin. He had promised a live demonstration of a system that was currently counting down to its own encryption lockdown. He had not just stolen a project, he had committed fraud on a corporate scale. He had lied to the board of directors, misled investors, and claimed authorship of a copyrighted digital asset. And he had done it all on a recorded company-wide broadcast. It was a masterpiece of self-destruction. My phone rang, breaking the silence in the apartment. The caller identification displayed Marcus' name. I answered immediately, putting the call on speakerphone while I organized the files on my desktop. "Did you get the recording?" Marcus asked. His voice was brisk, stripped of any familial warmth. He was operating entirely as a compliance attorney now. "I am looking at it right now," I replied. He claimed full authorship. He put his name and Jessica's name on the title slide. He told the CEO they built it from scratch. Marcus let out a low whistle over the line, the sound of a hunter spotting the prey stepping squarely into the snare. "He actually did it," Marcus murmured. "He claimed origin authorship on a recorded corporate channel. The arrogance is almost impressive. I have the video saved to 3 separate encrypted drives I confirmed, along with the intrusion logs from his hacking attempt on Friday night. Good. Marcus' tone turned sharp and commanding. He just handed us the rope. Now we pull it tight. Bradley thinks he is playing office politics. He thinks taking your project is like stealing a stapler. He does not comprehend the magnitude of federal intellectual property law. By presenting that software as his original creation, he just exposed the entire corporation to a multi-million-dollar copyright infringement lawsuit. I looked at the folder on my desktop labeled Legal Defense. Inside were the time-stamped commit logs, the server rental receipts in my name, and the official copyright registration forms I had filed weeks ago, long before Bradley ever demanded the master key. "What is the next move?" I asked. My voice was steady, void of the panic Bradley had banked on. "You send the email Marcus instructed, the one we drafted last night. Attach the copyright registration, the intrusion logs, and the video file you just downloaded. Send it to the head of Human Resources. Copy the Chief Executive Officer and the Corporate General Counsel. Do not add any emotional commentary. Do not ask for your job back. Let the documents speak for themselves." I opened the draft in my personal email client. The recipient list was populated. Sarah Jenkins, Director of Human Resources, the CEO, the lead corporate attorney. "Send it now," Marcus said. "Let us teach Mr. Pierce exactly what happens when you try to steal from the architect." I moved the cursor over the send button. I thought about the smirking face on the Zoom call. I thought about my mother telling me to know my place. I clicked the button. The email vanished into the ether carrying a payload that was about to shatter the glass walls of the executive suite. At 10:15 that morning, the corporate headquarters in downtown Seattle was buzzing with the post-meeting adrenaline. In her corner office on the 14th floor, Sarah Jenkins, the Director of Human Resources, sat behind her glass desk. Sarah was a seasoned executive, a woman who had navigated corporate scandals, layoffs, and executive tantrums for 2 decades. She knew how to protect the company. She thought she had seen every type of workplace crisis imaginable. She was wrong. She took a sip of her lukewarm coffee, her eyes scanning the morning influx of emails. A new message popped into her inbox, flagged with a red exclamation point, indicating high importance. The subject line read, "Confidential legal notice, intellectual property infringement, and unauthorized termination." The sender was Chloe Hastings, using a personal encrypted email address. Sarah frowned. She had processed the termination paperwork for Chloe just an hour ago, following a direct, albeit highly irregular mandate from Bradley Pierce. Terminated employees often sent angry emails. They threatened lawsuits they could not afford or wrote lengthy manifestos about unfair treatment. Sarah anticipated a desperate plea for severance or a list of grievances against Bradley management style. She prepared herself to forward the message to the legal department for standard archiving. She clicked open the email. The body text was startlingly brief. It did not contain a single emotional sentence. It simply stated that the attached document served as formal notification of severe intellectual property violations committed by a senior executive, placing the corporation in imminent legal jeopardy. The email was carbon copied directly to the Chief Executive Officer and the entire corporate legal counsel team. Sarah set her coffee mug down carefully. The lack of emotion in the text unnerved her. She clicked on the attached PDF file, a heavy 40-page document compiled with clinical precision. The first page displayed a formal certificate of registration from the United States Copyright Office. The title of the work was listed as Project Apex Predictive Logistics Algorithm. The sole registered author and copyright claimant was Chloe Hastings. The registration date preceded Bradley Pierce's presentation by several weeks. Sarah's pulse quickened. She scrolled to the next section. It contained a comprehensive digital audit trail. Timestamps, commit logs, and server hosting receipts clearly demonstrated that every single line of code for Project Apex was written outside of regular business hours, utilizing private hardware, and hosted on a privately funded external server. A highlighted legal brief authored by Marcus dissected the company standard intellectual property assignment clause, proving unequivocally that the corporation held no legal claim to the software. Project Apex was not company property, it was a private asset. Sarah felt a cold sweat prickle at her hairline. Bradley Pierce had just fired the sole legal owner of the software the company was relying on to secure a $15 million contract that afternoon. She scrolled faster, her eyes widening as she reached the final section of the dossier. The header read, "Evidence of corporate cyber intrusion and attempted theft." It contained the reverse IP trace logs from Friday night. The data clearly showed a brute force hacking attempt originating from the corporate network, specifically pinpointing the router assigned to Bradley Pierce Executive Suite, targeting a private external server. Sarah gasped, her hand jerking across the desk. The ceramic coffee mug tipped over, spilling dark liquid across her manicured notes, but she did not even notice. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Bradley Pierce had not just stolen credit for a project. He had utilized corporate infrastructure to launch a cyberattack against a private citizen to steal copyrighted intellectual property, and then he publicly terminated that citizen to cover his tracks. The company was not just facing a wrongful termination suit. They were staring down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar federal copyright infringement case compounded by potential criminal charges under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And Bradley had broadcast his claim of ownership to 120 employees, creating a permanent recorded confession. Her desk phone rang a harsh, jarring sound that made her jump. The caller identification showed the Chief Executive Officer direct line. Sarah snatched the receiver. "Yes, sir. Did you read the email from Hastings?" the CEO bellowed. His voice, normally a controlled, booming baritone, was vibrating with sheer, unadulterated panic. "I am looking at it right now, sir," Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. "The documentation appears legally sound. She holds the federal copyright. The intrusion logs place the hacking attempt squarely in Bradley's office." The CEO let out a stream of profanity that would have violated several workplace conduct policies. Pierce just stood in front of the entire company and claimed he built that software. "He told me it was ready for the logistics partners at 2:00. We have board members flying in for this demonstration. If we do not have that software, we lose the contract. If we lose the contract, the stock tanks." Sir Sarah interjected, trying to maintain her professional composure. "The immediate concern is liability. Pierce used our network to attempt a cyber theft. By firing her, he escalated this from an internal dispute to a massive external legal threat. We are exposed, completely exposed." "Get him out of there," the CEO roared. "I do not care what he is doing. I want his system access revoked, his office locked down, and I want him in the main conference room immediately. Do not let him touch a single computer." Sarah slammed the receiver down. She bypassed the standard protocol, hitting the speed dial for the head of internal corporate security. This was no longer a human resources issue. This was damage control for a catastrophic corporate emergency. Meanwhile, on the 10th floor, Bradley Pierce was holding court in the glass-walled break room. He stood by the espresso machine, surrounded by his loyalists, basking in the afterglow of his morning presentation. He was holding a fresh cup of coffee, laughing loudly at a joke made by Greg, the junior analyst. "I am telling you," Bradley bragged, leaning against the counter, "it is all about trimming the fat. Hastings was a dead weight. You have to be willing to make the tough calls if you want to lead in this industry. Jessica and I are going to show the board what real innovation looks like this afternoon." Greg nodded enthusiastically, eager to secure his place in the new hierarchy. "Absolutely, Bradley." The presentation was brilliant. The CEO looked incredibly impressed. Bradley took a slow sip of his espresso, savoring the taste of stolen victory. He imagined his upcoming promotion, the corner office on the top floor, the expanded bonus package. He felt invincible. He had successfully purged the one person who challenged his authority, and he had secured the ultimate prize. The break room doors slid open. The laughter died instantly. Two men in dark suits wearing the distinct earpieces of internal corporate security stepped into the room. They did not smile. They did not offer greetings. They moved with a chilling, synchronized purpose. The atmosphere in the break room turned instantly frigid. The junior analyst stepped back, creating a wide path. Bradley lowered his coffee cup, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Can I help you, gentlemen? We are in the middle of a team debrief." The lead security officer, a towering man with a buzz cut, stepped directly in front of Bradley, invading his personal space. "Mr. Pierce," he said, his voice flat and carrying across the silent room, "you need to come with us, right now." Bradley forced a chuckle, trying to maintain his executive facade in front of his subordinates. "Is there a problem?" "I have a critical demonstration to prepare for at 2:00. "The CEO is expecting me. The CEO is the one who sent us." The officer replied, not moving an inch. "We have been instructed to escort you to conference room 4B immediately. You are not to return to your office. You are not to access your phone or any company devices. Hand over your building access card." The color drained from Bradley's face. The arrogant smile slipped, replaced by a sudden stark confusion. He looked around the break room. The sycophants who had been cheering him seconds ago were now staring at the floor, suddenly desperate to distance themselves from a man being publicly flanked by security. Greg backed away, hiding behind the water cooler. "This is highly irregular," Bradley stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "I am the Vice President of Operations. You cannot just demand my access card without an explanation." The second security officer stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on Bradley's shoulder. "It was not a request, sir. Hand over the card or we will remove it for you." Bradley swallowed hard. His hands shook as he reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing his lanyard and access badge. He handed it to the lead officer. The plastic clattered against the man palm. "Walk," the officer commanded, gesturing toward the exit. Bradley Pierce, the man who had orchestrated my public humiliation just hours prior, was marched out of the break room. He walked down the long, fluorescent-lit corridor, flanked by security guards, past rows of glass offices, where dozens of employees watched in stunned silence. The whisper network ignited instantly. The conqueror was being dragged to the executioner block, and he had absolutely no idea why. Conference Room 4B was an interrogation chamber disguised as an executive meeting space. Located in the deepest corner of the 14th floor, it featured thick soundproof walls and heavy motorized blinds that were currently drawn tight, blocking out the city skyline. At 11 o'clock, the door opened. Security shoved Bradley Pierce inside and closed the door with a heavy final click. Sarah Jenkins sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her posture rigid, her hands folded over a thick printed dossier. In the center of the table, the black conference phone sat, illuminated the green call light indicating an active line. The chief executive officer was listening. "Sit down, Bradley." The CEO voice crackled through the speaker, distorted by static but heavy with suppressed rage. Bradley pulled out a leather chair, his movements stiff and jerky. He tugged at his collar, his perfectly styled hair now slightly askew. He forced a strained, placating smile, aiming it at Sarah, trying to reestablish his dominance. "Sarah, I do not understand this theater. I have a critical presentation in 3 hours. Security dragging me out of the break room is entirely inappropriate. Stop talking," the CEO barked from the speaker. The sharp command cut through Bradley's attempted charm like a blade. "You are here to explain a severe liability risk you have created for this corporation." Bradley blinked, feigning utter confusion. "Liability? Sir, I just handled a basic personnel issue. Chloe Hastings was insubordinate. She refused to hand over the repository access for Project Apex, which is company property. She tried to hold the software hostage. Firing her was a necessary disciplinary action to protect our assets. I secured the situation." Sarah watched him dig his own grave, her expression unreadable. She did not interrupt. She let him commit his lies to the recorded line. "Is that so?" the CEO asked, his tone dangerously quiet. "You assert that Project Apex is the intellectual property of this corporation." "Absolutely," Bradley insisted, leaning forward, trying to project earnest confidence. "She developed it while under our employ. It falls entirely under the standard intellectual property assignment clause. She was a rogue employee trying to steal corporate innovation." The CEO let out a slow, terrifying breath through the speaker. "If the software is company property, Bradley, and as you claim this morning you and your cousin built it from scratch, then you should have no problem demonstrating your access." Sarah slid a sleek, company-issued laptop across the mahogany table toward Bradley. She opened the lid. The screen displayed the internal network login portal. "Open the master repository for Project Apex right now," the CEO commanded. "Show us the source code. Prove you are the author." Bradley stared at the glowing screen. A bead of sweat materialized at his temple, tracking a slow path down his cheek. He reached for the keyboard, his fingers hovering over the keys. He knew he did not have the master key. He had spent Friday night trying to hack it and failed. He typed in his administrative credentials, trying to access the shared drive, where he assumed Chloe might have left a backup. The screen loaded, then flashed a stark red message. "Access denied. Path not found." He typed faster, his fingernails clicking loudly in the silent room. He tried overriding the directory permissions. He tried accessing Chloe archived employee folders. Every attempt resulted in the same glaring red text: access denied. He pushed the laptop back, wiping his damp forehead with the back of his hand. She sabotaged it. Bradley stammered, his voice rising in panic. She must have instituted a localized lockdown before she logged off the Zoom call. It is a retaliatory cyberattack. She changed the passwords to destroy company property. We need to press charges against her immediately. Sarah Jenkins finally moved. She picked up the thick dossier Chloe had emailed her, the one compiled with Marcus' legal expertise. She tossed it across the table. It landed in front of Bradley with a heavy, definitive thud. She did not change the passwords, Bradley, Sarah said, her voice dripping with ice, because she does not need to sabotage something she legally owns. Bradley stared at the folder. Open it, the CEO ordered. Bradley's hands shook as he flipped open the cover. The first page stared back at him. The Federal Certificate of Registration from the United States Copyright Office. The title: Project Apex Predictive Logistics Algorithm. The registered author: Chloe Hastings. His eyes darted across the page, refusing to process the information. This is a fake. She forged a government document. She cannot copyright company property. Turn to page 12, Sarah instructed coldly. Bradley fumbled with the pages. Page 12 detailed the digital audit trail. It highlighted the server receipts and the commit timestamps. Sarah leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. She built that software on a private external server, using personal hardware entirely outside of business hours. Our intellectual property clause only covers work generated using corporate resources or time. Legally, Project Apex is her private asset. We have zero claim to it. None. Bradley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. He looked at the speakerphone, then back at Sarah, desperation creeping into his eyes. But she works here. It applies to her job. It applies to the data models she built during her shifts. The CEO roared through the speaker, the static amplifying his fury. It does not apply to an independent software ecosystem she built in her living room. You stood in front of 120 employees and explicitly claimed authorship of a federally copyrighted asset. You claimed it was ready for a live demonstration. You lied to the board. Sir, I can explain. Bradley gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles white. Explain page 38. Sarah interrupted, her voice slicing through his panic. Bradley flipped to the back of the dossier. He stared at the reverse IP intrusion logs. The data clearly mapped the brute force hacking attempt originating from his specific executive suite router, targeting Chloe private server late Friday night. You did not just fire a rogue employee, the CEO snarled. You used our corporate network to launch a cyber attack against a private citizen to steal her intellectual property. That is a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And then you terminated her to silence her. You have exposed this entire corporation to catastrophic legal and criminal liability. I was trying to secure the asset for the company. Bradley pleaded, his voice cracking. I was protecting our interests. The logistics partners are arriving in 2 hours. We need that software to save the contract. You just fired the only person who holds the key to saving that contract, the CEO shouted. The partners are expecting a live demonstration of Project Apex. If we do not deliver, they walk. We lose $15 million today, and our stock plummets tomorrow morning. Because of you. Bradley was cornered. The walls of conference room 4B were closing in. The undeniable proof of his theft, his incompetence, and his criminal exposure lay scattered on the table before him. The polished executive persona shattered completely, leaving behind a terrified, grasping coward. It was not me, Bradley blurted out, pointing a trembling finger at the speakerphone. I am not the technical lead. Jessica is. She is the strategic advisor. She handles the coding architecture. I just manage the oversight. If there was a hack, if the code is locked, it is her fault. She told me the system was ready. She lied to me. He threw his own family member under the bus without a second of hesitation. He was willing to sacrifice his cousin to save his own neck. Sarah Jenkins did not look surprised. She pressed a button on a small remote under the table. The heavy conference room doors unlatched and swung open. Internal security escorted Jessica Pierce into the room. Jessica was 24 years old. She wore a designer tweed jacket and carried a luxury handbag that cost more than most employees' monthly salaries. But her usual haughty demeanor was entirely gone. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks, and she was sobbing uncontrollably, gasping for air. Security had evidently pulled her straight from her new corner office. Bradley stared at her, his eyes wide with horror. "Jessica, tell them!" Bradley yelled, desperate to sell his lie. "Tell them you managed the code repository for Apex. Tell them you messed up the access protocols." Jessica looked at him, her face twisting in a mix of terror and profound confusion. She shook her head violently, tears flying from her face. "I do not know what you are talking about," she wailed, her voice echoing shrilly in the soundproof room. "I do not know what a repository is. I do not even know how to use Microsoft Excel properly. You told me my job was just to organize client lunches and plan the holiday party. You said you had the tech stuff handled." She collapsed into an empty chair, burying her face in her hands, her designer bag sliding to the floor. "I do not know how to code," she sobbed loudly. "Please do not let them arrest me. My mother will kill me." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Jessica weeping. Bradley stood paralyzed, his final lie dismantled by the very person he had tried to use as a shield. The nepotism, the theft, the sheer staggering incompetence were laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room. Sarah Jenkins looked at Bradley with a level of disgust usually reserved for toxic waste. The CEO voice came through the speaker one last time, cold, precise, and carrying the weight of an executioner blade. "You have 90 minutes, Bradley," the CEO said. "You have 90 minutes to contact Chloe Hastings, beg for her forgiveness, and acquire the rights to use her software for the demonstration. If she does not agree, if that software does not run at 2 o'clock, I will personally hand this entire dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Get out of my sight." At 12:30, the corporate headquarters resembled a besieged fortress. The impending arrival of the logistics partners loomed over the executive floor like a storm front. 90 minutes remained before the demonstration. 90 minutes before the company either secured a $15 million contract or watched its quarterly projections plummet into the abyss. Bradley Pierce was out of options. Banished from his office and stripped of his administrative access, he retreated to the only unmonitored space available, a stall in the executive washroom on the 12th floor. He locked the heavy wooden door, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The pristine porcelain and chrome surroundings offered no comfort to a man watching his career disintegrate. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. His hands trembled so severely he almost dropped the device onto the tiled floor. He opened his text message thread with Chloe. The last message he had sent just hours prior stared back at him. "Join the Zoom. Watch me take everything you have." The arrogance of those words now felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. He deleted the message, a futile attempt to erase the past, and began typing. Across the city, my apartment was a sanctuary of calm. The midday sun streamed through the living room windows, catching the steam rising from the cup of chamomile tea resting on the coffee table. I sat on the plush sofa, my legs crossed, watching the screen of my phone illuminate. Marcus sat in the armchair opposite me, reviewing a thick stack of printed case law precedents regarding software licensing. He looked up as my phone chimed. The first message arrived. "Chloe, please. There has been a massive misunderstanding. The HR department overreacted. I can clear this up. Just send me the authentication key for Apex." I did not touch the phone. I merely watched the text bubble appear. 10 seconds later, the typing indicator flared to life again. The facade of a simple misunderstanding crumbled immediately. "Chloe, I am begging you. The partners are arriving at 2. The CEO is threatening federal charges. I will double your salary. I will promote you to senior director. Just give me the code. You win. Please." I picked up my teacup, blowing gently on the surface of the hot liquid. The transition from ruthless corporate predator to a panicked, begging subordinate was swift and entirely predictable. He was attempting to bribe me with company resources he no longer controlled, offering promotions he no longer had the authority to grant. The messages continued to pour in a frantic stream of consciousness, detailing his unraveling sanity. "I will resign tomorrow if you just help me today. Do not let me go to prison over a software glitch. Chloe, answer me. Kutoy voy, save me." I looked at Marcus. The seasoned compliance attorney was watching the notifications light up my screen with a look of mild amusement. His dark eyes analyzed the digital desperation playing out before us. "He is unraveling," I noted, taking a slow sip of my tea. "He is offering me a promotion he cannot authorize." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let him unravel. Panic breeds negotiation errors. He expects you to engage. He expects you to barter, to demand an apology, or to yell at him for the Zoom call. You must do none of those things." I set the cup down. Should I block his number? The constant chiming is annoying. "Absolutely not," Marcus instructed, his tone firm. "Do not block him, but do not reply to a single word. In any high-stakes negotiation, silence is a weapon of mass psychological destruction. When you do not answer, his mind will conjure worst-case scenarios faster than any threat you could possibly type. He is negotiating against his own terror right now. Let him bid against himself." I nodded, understanding the strategy. Marcus was right. Every unanswered minute magnified Bradley's desperation. He was locked in a bathroom stall, staring at a screen that offered no salvation, realizing that the woman he had dismissed as a quiet background worker held his entire future in her hands. My phone chimed again. A new message from Bradley. "I will transfer $50,000 from my personal account to yours right now. Just text me the password, please." I showed the screen to Marcus. He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. Attempted corporate bribery transitioned seamlessly into attempted personal bribery. I is creating a wonderful paper trail for the SEC investigators. Just let it sit there. We waited in comfortable silence for another 20 minutes. The apartment felt far removed from the corporate warfare raging downtown. I thought about the years I had spent working late analyzing data trends, building models that Bradley casually claimed as his own. I had stayed quiet, believing that hard work would eventually be recognized. I had believed the corporate myth that loyalty breeds reward. I understood now that in environments built on nepotism and theft, loyalty only breeds exploitation. At 1:10, the incoming barrage of text messages abruptly stopped. The digital silence was brief. 2 minutes later, my phone began to ring. It was not a text message, and it was not Bradley's personal number. The caller identification displayed a verified contact. It was the direct private extension for the office of the Chief Executive Officer. Marcus sat up straighter, closing his legal pad. "The executive branch has realized the middleman is compromised. They are stepping in to negotiate directly. Answer it. Put it on speaker." I swiped the green icon to accept the call and tapped the speakerphone button. I placed the phone flat on the coffee table between us. "Hello, this is Chloe Hastings." I kept my voice neutral, displaying neither triumph nor anxiety. "Chloe." The CEO voice filled the living room. It was not the booming, authoritative tone he used during all-hands meetings. It was strained tight and underscored with a palpable sense of urgency. "This is Richard Sterling. I am calling to personally apologize for the events that transpired on the company broadcast this morning. I listened. I did not offer a polite dismissal. I did not say it was fine. I let his apology hang in the air, forcing him to continue into the silence. The termination was unauthorized and executed without board approval. Richard continued scrambling to fill the void. Bradley Pierce acted outside his jurisdiction. He has been suspended pending a full investigation. We want you back, Chloe. We recognize your true value to this organization. I appreciate the clarification regarding Mr. Pierce's employment status," Richard replied, ensuring my tone remained strictly professional. However, my termination paperwork was processed and signed by Human Resources. "Legally, I am no longer an employee. Chloe, please." Richard's voice cracked slightly, shedding the last remnants of his executive armor. "The logistics partners are sitting in the lobby. We need Project Apex operational for the demonstration in 45 minutes. I am asking you to log in and authorize the software. Name your price for the reinstatement. We can handle the paperwork retroactively." He was begging. The most powerful man in the building was pleading with a terminated employee to save his quarterly earnings report. He assumed, like Bradley, that I could be bought with a simple salary bump and a promise of better treatment. He assumed I wanted my old life back. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a sharp single nod. The green light to launch the counteroffensive. "Richard," I said, leaning closer to the phone, "I am not interested in returning to my previous position. My employment with the company is concluded. However, I am aware of the predicament you are currently facing regarding the demonstration of my proprietary software." There was a heavy pause on the line. "What are you proposing, Chloe? I am willing to come downtown and discuss a licensing agreement for the use of Project Apex for your demonstration this afternoon," I stated clearly. "I will arrive in 20 minutes, but I am not coming alone." "Who are you bringing?" Richard asked, his voice thick with apprehension. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea before answering. "I am bringing my legal counsel. We will meet you in the main executive boardroom. Have your signature ready." At 1:15 in the afternoon, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the corporate headquarters. 5 hours earlier, I had been an invisible data analyst publicly discarded and digitally erased. Now I was returning not as a subordinate seeking reinstatement, but as a principal stakeholder controlling the company financial future. I had traded my usual muted office attire for a structured slate gray blazer and matching trousers. I did not look like someone who had spent the morning weeping over a lost job. I looked like an executive arriving to finalize a hostile takeover. Marcus Thorne walked smoothly beside me. He wore a midnight blue suit that communicated sharp, uncompromising authority. He carried a slim black leather briefcase that contained the licensing contracts he had drafted over the weekend. He moved with the quiet, predatory grace of a man who dissected corporate fraud for a living and found the current environment target-rich. The main lobby was an expansive marble-floored atrium, usually buzzing with the post-lunch rush of employees returning to their desks. As Marcus and I crossed the threshold, the ambient noise level dropped precipitously. The transition was immediate and visceral. I recognized the faces of the junior analysts and mid-level managers clustered near the elevator banks. These were the same people who had flooded my phone with mocking text messages mere hours ago, eager to curry favor with the man who had fired me. Greg, the analyst who had joked about me not coding my way out of a pink slip, was standing near the security desk holding a stack of files. When he saw me, he froze. The files slipped slightly in his grasp. The mocking bravado he displayed in his text messages vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, instinctual panic. He quickly averted his gaze and pressed himself closer to the security turnstiles, desperately trying to blend into the architecture. The crowd parted. It was not a polite yielding of space. It was a rapid, synchronized retreat. Employees physically stepped back, creating a wide, clear path to the elevators staring at us with a mixture of profound shock and morbid curiosity. They did not understand the legal mechanics at play, but they recognized the power dynamic had violently inverted. The woman who was executed on the morning broadcast was walking back into the building flanked by high-powered legal counsel, and the atmosphere tasted like impending doom. As we neared the central reception desk, I spotted Bradley Pierce. I was not in conference room 4B anymore. He had been temporarily released by internal security to perform one final desperate duty: to greet the visiting logistics partners and stall for time. He stood near the VIP lounge area, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his tie loosened. The confident swagger that defined his entire career had completely evaporated. He saw me approach. The color drained from his face with such suddenness that he appeared physically ill. His eyes darted from me to Marcus, taking in the tailored suits, the briefcase, and the unapologetic confidence radiating from our approach. Bradley lunged forward, abandoning his post near the VIP lounge. He intercepted our path, blocking the route to the executive elevators. He looked around frantically, ensuring the visiting partners were out of earshot. He leaned in, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate the only tactic he had left. "Chloe, what are you doing here with him?" Bradley hissed, keeping his voice to a frantic whisper. "You are escalating this unnecessarily. Just go upstairs, log into the terminal, and open Apex. I will tell Human Resources to shred the termination paperwork. We can say it was a system error. Do not ruin this for everyone." I stopped walking. I did not step back. I looked at the man who had spent 3 years claiming my work as his own, who had tried to hack my private server, and who had fired me to cover his tracks. I was still trying to bargain with counterfeit currency. He still believed he had something to offer me. I did not have to say a word. Marcus stepped smoothly between Bradley and me, smoothly breaking his line of sight. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not issue a loud threat. He utilized the chilling practice tone of a lawyer addressing a hostile witness. Mr. Pierce Marcus stated, his voice ringing clearly in the quiet lobby. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am Corporate Compliance Counsel representing Ms. Hastings. I must inform you that any further communication directed at my client will be formally recorded and entered into evidence for the forthcoming federal litigation regarding intellectual property theft and unauthorized cyber intrusion. Step aside." Bradley flinched as if he had been physically struck. The words federal litigation and cyber intrusion echoed in the marble atrium. Several employees lingering near the reception desk gasped audibly. Bradley's mouth opened, but the slick, practiced corporate defenses he usually relied upon failed him entirely. He looked at the leather briefcase in Marcus' hand, realizing with crushing finality that he was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and out of time. He took a slow, trembling step backward, yielding the path. Before we could proceed to the elevators, the polished mahogany doors of the executive suite swung open. A woman in a dark skirt suit rushed out her heels, clicking rapidly against the marble floor. It was the Chief Executive Officer personal assistant. She bypassed Bradley entirely, treating him as if he were a piece of discarded furniture. She approached me, her expression a mask of panicked deference. "Miss Hastings," she said, her voice slightly breathless, "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you and your counsel. He asked me to escort you directly to the senior boardroom. Please right this way." She gestured toward the private, restricted access elevator bank reserved exclusively for C-suite executives and board members. It was a level of the building Bradley had spent his entire career trying to reach, a sanctum he had never been granted access to. I glanced briefly at Bradley. He was watching the assistant usher me toward the executive elevator. The realization of his total defeat washed over his features. The woman he had fired on a video call to secure his promotion was now being escorted to the highest seat of power in the company, while he was left standing in the lobby, waiting for the axe to fall. I offered him no parting words. I turned and followed the assistant into the elevator, Marcus stepping in right behind me. The heavy brass doors slid shut, sealing off the lobby and carrying us upward to dictate the terms of their surrender. The executive boardroom occupied the entire southwest corner of the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, but the atmosphere inside felt as confined as a pressure cooker. The long table was crafted from a single slab of reclaimed walnut. Richard Sterling, the chief executive officer, sat at the head. Sarah Jenkins, the director of human resources, sat to his right, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. The company general counsel, a stern man named Harrison, sat to his left, reviewing the dossier Chloe had emailed earlier. The assistant opened the heavy doors and ushered Marcus and me inside. Richard stood up immediately, offering a tight, strained smile. The powerful aura he usually projected was notably diminished. "Chloe, thank you for coming up," Richard said, gesturing to the empty leather chairs opposite him. "I want to start by formally apologizing for the unacceptable events that transpired this morning. Bradley Pierce's actions were rogue, unauthorized, and entirely out of line with our corporate values. He has been suspended, and pending a swift investigation, he will be permanently terminated." I took a seat. Marcus sat beside me, placing his black briefcase squarely on the table. I did not return Richard's smile. I nodded once, acknowledging his words without accepting the apology. "We recognize your immense value to this organization." Richard continued, shifting into his negotiation cadence. "We understand the frustration you must feel regarding the misattribution of Project Apex. To rectify this, I am prepared to tear up your termination paperwork right now. Furthermore, I am authorizing an immediate reinstatement to your position as Director of Data Analytics, accompanied by a 20% salary increase and a guaranteed performance bonus at the end of the quarter." He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table, adopting a tone of collaborative urgency. "All we need in return is for you to log into the terminal, authenticate the access protocols, and ensure Apex is fully operational for the logistics demonstration in 30 minutes. We are a team, Chloe. Let us fix this together." He framed it as a generous offer, a 20% raise and the retention of my job. He assumed the financial bump would erase the humiliation of the morning broadcast. He assumed I was desperate to return to the fold. I offered a small, cool smile. It did not reach my eyes. I looked at Marcus. He unlatched the brass clasps of his briefcase with 2 sharp clicks. He withdrew a crisp, printed document bound in a blue legal folder and slid it precisely across the walnut table until it rested in front of the CEO. Mr. Sterling Marcus began his voice a low, commanding rumble that instantly altered the gravity in the room. My client appreciates the sentiment behind your offer of reinstatement. However, Ms. Hastings did not come here today to ask for her job back. The employment relationship between my client and this corporation was severed this morning effectively and legally by a member of your executive management team. Richard frowned, looking from Marcus to the blue folder. "What is this?" he asked, his tone hardening. "That is a software licensing agreement," Marcus explained calmly. "As clearly demonstrated by the federal copyright registration and the digital audit trail currently in possession of your legal counsel, Project Apex is the sole proprietary intellectual property of Chloe Hastings. It was developed independently outside of corporate hours using private resources." Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Ms. Hastings is not here as an employee. She is here as an independent software vendor. She is offering to lease the operational rights to the Project Apex predictive algorithm to your corporation. The licensing fee is $2 million annually payable upon execution of that contract." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. The General Counsel Harrison flipped open the blue folder, his eyes scanning the terms of the agreement. Sarah Jenkins looked like she wanted to slide under the table. $2 million. Richard's voice rose, the facade of corporate diplomacy shattering. He slammed his hand against the walnut table. The sharp crack echoed through the boardroom. "This is extortion. That software was developed to solve a company problem. You built it while on our payroll, Chloe. We provided the industry knowledge and the platform for you to understand the logistics bottlenecks. You owe this company your loyalty." I did not flinch at his outburst. I maintained direct eye contact with the most powerful man in the building. "My loyalty, Richard," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "My loyalty was demonstrated when I spent 11 months building a $15 million solution to save your quarterly projections. The company loyalty was demonstrated when it allowed an incompetent manager to steal my work hack, my private server, and fire me on a public broadcast in front of 120 people while you listened. Loyalty is a two-way street, and you paved yours over." Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You think you can hold us hostage an hour before the biggest presentation of the year?" He turned to Harrison, the General Counsel. "I will not be extorted by a former employee. If she refuses to unlock the system, we will sue her for breach of contract. We will bury her in litigation for violating the non-compete clause and intentionally sabotaging corporate operations. We will drag this out until she is bankrupt." Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking from the CEO to Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with the legal footing they were currently standing on. "Sir, given the copyright registration, a lawsuit would be difficult. Let them sue." Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the General Counsel hesitation. He reached into his briefcase again. "You can certainly attempt a prolonged legal battle," Mr. Sterling Marcus said, his tone utterly devoid of concern. "However, before you instruct your legal team to draft those filings, I strongly suggest you review this second document." Marcus withdrew a single sheet of paper printed with a dense matrix of numbers and highlighted financial routing codes. He slid it across the table, placing it directly on top of the licensing agreement. "My client is a data analyst," Mr. Sterling Marcus stated softly. "She identifies anomalies. While tracing the unauthorized access to her private server, we discovered some very interesting discrepancies in the internal budget reports generated by Bradley Pierce over the last 24 months. I believe you will find the reading highly illuminating." Richard glared at Marcus, then looked down at the single sheet of paper. As his eyes tracked the highlighted numbers, the anger drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, rigid terror. The true depth of Bradley betrayal was about to be laid bare. Richard Sterling stared at the single sheet of paper Marcus had placed on the walnut table. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, the kind of stillness that precedes a catastrophic structural failure. Harrison, the General Counsel, leaned closer, adjusting his glasses to read the highlighted figures over the Chief Executive Officer's shoulder. Sarah Jenkins remained frozen in her chair, sensing the corporate ground giving way beneath them. This was the payoff I had been waiting for. The intellectual property dispute was merely the hook. The true depth of Bradley Pierce's corruption was far more systemic and infinitely more dangerous. When Bradley had hacked my private server on Friday night, he left a digital footprint wide open for a return trip. Marcus, utilizing his expertise as a compliance auditor, had guided me in executing a reverse trace. We did not just stop at identifying his IP address. We followed the digital breadcrumbs directly into the departmental budget approvals Bradley had been managing for the past 2 years. I watched Richard's eyes track across the data matrix. The color had entirely abandoned his face, leaving his skin a sallow, unhealthy gray. A prominent vein pulsed rapidly against his temple. "What is this?" Richard whispered. The booming executive authority was gone, replaced by the hollow tone of a man realizing he was standing on a landmine. That Marcus explained, his voice smooth and devoid of any pity, is a preliminary forensic audit of the discretionary spending accounts managed by the Vice President of Operations over the past 24 months. Marcus leaned forward, pointing a long, immaculate finger at a specific column of highlighted transactions. You will notice a recurring series of vendor payments allocated to external data strategy consulting. These payments were authorized to bypass the internal procurement protocols due to their categorization as urgent operational expenses. I had noticed those budgetary rejections months ago. Whenever I requested additional funding for server upgrades or advanced analytic tools for my team, Bradley would deny the requests, citing budget constraints. Yet the departmental ledger always showed maximum utilization. I assumed he was reallocating the funds to other departments to curry favor. I was wrong. These phantom invoices, Marcus continued detailing the mechanism of the fraud, total roughly $450,000 over the last 2 fiscal years. They were paid out in staggered increments to a registered vendor named Apex Consulting, LLC. Richard gripped the edges of the table. His knuckles were bone white. Apex Consulting. Yes, I said, speaking up for the first time since Marcus presented the document. He stole the name of my software project months ago to create a corporate shell. He intended to claim authorship of Project Apex today to retroactively justify the exorbitant consulting fees he had already siphoned out of the company. It was a long game to legitimize stolen funds. Harrison snatched the paper from the table, his legal mind racing to assess the damage. Who owns the LLC? Who is the registered agent? Marcus did not miss a beat. We pulled the state corporate registry filings over the weekend. The registered owner and sole proprietor of Apex Consulting, LLC, is Jessica Pierce. Sarah Jenkins let out a sharp, audible gasp. Bradley Pierce was not just a bully taking credit for a subordinate slide deck. He was a financial predator. He had orchestrated a sophisticated embezzlement scheme, systematically draining hundreds of thousands of dollars from the corporate treasury and funneling the stolen capital directly into a shell company controlled by his uneducated cousin. He had used the company coffers as his personal family ATM. The hiring of Jessica as a strategic advisor was merely the final stage of the grift, bringing her onto the official payroll to further mask the ongoing financial irregularities. And the chief executive officer, the man responsible to the shareholders, had signed off on all of it, blinded by Bradley's smooth-talking presentations and aggressive networking. The company was not just facing an intellectual property lawsuit. They were harboring an active, large-scale corporate fraud operation in the executive suite. Richard's hands began to tremble. The sheet of paper rattled slightly against the polished wood. The realization of his own catastrophic oversight, the sheer embarrassment of being conned so thoroughly by an executive he had trusted and promoted, transformed his fear into explosive, unadulterated rage. The threat of suing me for breach of contract dissolved into thin air. A corporation cannot sue a former employee for withholding an algorithm when that same employee just delivered undeniable proof of a massive internal embezzlement ring. The leverage had shifted completely and permanently. Richard slammed his hand down on the intercom console located in the center of the table. The sudden violent movement made Sarah jump. He pressed the red emergency button that connected directly to the head of internal corporate security. The speaker crackled to life. "Security desk. Go ahead, Mr. Sterling." Richard's voice was a guttural, terrifying roar. It was the sound of a man who realized his entire kingdom was under threat from within. "Lock down the building," Richard commanded, spitting the words into the microphone. "Freeze every single financial account network access and physical passcard associated with Bradley Pierce and Jessica Pierce. I do not care what they are doing. Drag them both into this boardroom right now." "Yes, sir. Right away." The security officer responded, the urgency clear in his tone. Richard released the intercom button. He sat back in his large leather chair, breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, struggling to regain a fraction of his executive composure. The impending logistics demonstration, the $15 million contract, everything took a back seat to the cancer that had just been exposed in his leadership team. He slowly lowered his gaze and looked directly at me. The hostility from earlier was gone. In its place was a grim, reluctant respect. He recognized that the woman he had allowed to be humiliated on a company broadcast was the only person who had the analytical capability to uncover the rot eating away at his company. He looked at the licensing agreement Marcus had initially presented, still resting on the table. $2 million, Richard said quietly, his voice tight. $2 million, I confirmed my expression impassive. Payable upon execution. Richard did not argue. He did not threaten litigation. He simply nodded, accepting the harsh reality of his situation. We wait for Bradley, he said, his voice cold and flat. Then we finalize your contract. The silence inside the executive boardroom stretched into a long, suffocating expanse. No one reached for the pitchers of iced water. No one adjusted their seating. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the walnut table, his gaze fixed on the mahogany doors, his breathing shallow and tight. Beside him, the general counsel was already drafting preliminary legal defensive strategies on a yellow legal pad, calculating the exact exposure the corporation faced. I remained perfectly still in my chair, Marcus seated next to me, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. We had laid the trap, and now we only had to wait for the target to be dragged inside. The heavy double doors swung open. 2 internal security officers marched into the room. Between them, they hauled Bradley Pierce. The visual contrast from the man who had hosted the morning video call was striking. The immaculate, tailored executive aura had evaporated. His expensive suit jacket was bunched and wrinkled around his shoulders from the security guards holding his arms. His silk tie hung loose, the knot pulled halfway down his chest. Sweat stained the collar of his dress shirt, and a distinct sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. He was hyperventilating, taking quick, shallow breaths as his eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally that did not exist. Richard did not offer him a seat. The chief executive officer simply pointed a rigid finger toward the center of the conference table. Bradley stumbled forward as the guards released their grip. He attempted to smooth his jacket, a futile gesture to reclaim his dignity. He looked at Richard, bypassing Marcus and me entirely. Sir, this treatment is a severe violation of human resources protocol. Bradley stammered, his voice lacking its usual resonant depth. I am a vice president. You cannot subject me to this level of disrespect over a misunderstanding regarding a terminated employee. Richard did not raise his voice. The suppressed fury in his tone was far more intimidating than a shout. Look at the table, Bradley. Bradley lowered his gaze. He saw the blue legal folder containing my copyright registration and the software licensing agreement. But his eyes quickly bypassed those documents, locking onto the single sheet of paper Marcus had placed next to them. The forensic audit summary, the highlighted matrix of phantom invoices, the routing numbers leading directly to Apex Consulting LLC. The color drained from Bradley's face with such speed that his skin took on a sickly, translucent pallor. His jaw went slack. The cognitive dissonance of seeing his secret illegal embezzlement scheme printed out and sitting on the desk of the chief executive officer caused his brain to short-circuit. He stared at the name of the shell company he had registered under his cousin's name. He realized in a fraction of a second that the intellectual property theft was no longer his primary problem. He was looking at concrete evidence of corporate financial fraud. He lost control. The polished executive facade cracked and shattered. Bradley let out a desperate, guttural sound, something between a shout and a gasp. He lunged forward, throwing his upper body across the polished walnut table. His hands scrambled frantically, grabbing at the printed audit sheet, his fingers digging into the paper in a pathetic attempt to rip the evidence to shreds. He wanted to destroy the document as if tearing a single piece of paper would erase the digital trail Marcus had already secured. The security officers reacted instantly. The lead guard grabbed Bradley by the back of his suit collar and hauled him backward. The second officer grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. They slammed him down into one of the heavy leather chairs, pinning him in place. The scuffle echoed loudly in the pristine boardroom, the sound of scuffing shoes and heavy breathing, breaking the sterile corporate atmosphere. Bradley writhed against the guard's grip, his chest heaving. He bared his teeth, a vein throbbing visibly against his neck. He snapped his head toward me, his eyes wide and wild with cornered desperation. "You set me up!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the floor to ceiling windows. "You planned this. You are a traitor. You hacked your own system just to frame me." I rested my hands on my lap, watching his breakdown with the clinical detachment of a researcher observing a failed experiment. I did not flinch at his shouting. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. "I can ruin you!" Bradley yelled, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you won? My family built this city. My aunt sits on the hospital board with the mayor. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every tech firm in the country. I will destroy your career. I will ruin your life." He was resorting to the only currency he truly valued: nepotism and social status. He sounded exactly like my mother, believing that country club connections could override federal law. I looked at him, feeling no anger, only a profound, chilling pity. "You stole my idea," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and cut through his screaming like a scalpel. "You stole company money to fund your lifestyle, and you pressed the button to fire me on a public broadcast because you thought it would silence the only person who knew the truth." I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table. "I did not trap you, Bradley. I merely handed you a piece of rope, and you tied the knot around your own neck." Bradley opened his mouth to shout another threat, but Richard Sterling cut him off. "Shut your mouth, Pierce!" The CEO voice was a whip-crack of authority. Richard stood up from his chair at the head of the table. He looked down at the man he had promoted, the man who had systematically robbed his organization. "You are terminated." Richard declared the words, dropping like stones into the quiet room. "You are fired for cause effective this exact second. Your actions constitute gross misconduct and theft of corporate assets. You forfeit every benefit associated with your tenure. Your unvested stock options are revoked. Your severance package is nullified. Your health coverage ends today. You leave this building with nothing." Bradley stopped struggling against the guards. He slumped in the leather chair, his breathing ragged. He looked at the floor, the reality of his total financial ruin crashing down upon him. He was a man who lived far beyond his means, relying on the stolen consulting fees to maintain his illusion of wealth. Without his salary and his phantom income, his lifestyle would implode within weeks. But Richard was not finished. Furthermore, Richard continued, turning to the general counsel. "This corporation has a fiduciary duty to our shareholders. We do not handle embezzlement quietly to save face. Our legal department is compiling this entire dossier. By the end of business today, we are handing every piece of evidence over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are reporting you for wire fraud and corporate financial embezzlement." The word reverberated in the room. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. Bradley's face contorted in pure terror. A lawsuit was one thing. A corporate termination was survivable. But a federal criminal probe meant prison time. It meant asset forfeiture. It meant a public scandal that no amount of family networking could erase. He stared at Richard, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to formulate a single word of defense. Outside the thick mahogany doors of the boardroom, a sudden commotion erupted. Muffled shouting filtered through the heavy wood. The security detail stationed in the anteroom was engaged in a loud, frantic argument. The doors burst open. Jessica Pierce pushed her way into the boardroom, ignoring the security guard trying to grab her arm. Her appearance was a stark contrast to the polished socialite who had walked into the building that morning. Her designer tweed jacket was slipping off one shoulder. Her expensive mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, jagged tracks. She had been held in the waiting area, eavesdropping on the muffled shouts from inside the boardroom. She had heard the CEO mention wire fraud. She had heard the acronym for the federal authorities. The survival instinct of the privileged is a powerful force. When faced with the prospect of an orange jumpsuit and a federal indictment, blood loyalty vanishes instantly. Jessica stood in the doorway, hyperventilating, her eyes darting from the CEO to the legal counsel and finally settling on her cousin. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at Bradley's face. "It was him," Jessica shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing with raw panic. "He forced me to do it. I did not want to sign the papers for the consulting company. He told me it was just a tax write-off. He told me it was perfectly legal." Bradley stared at her betrayal registering through his own haze of terror. "Jessica, shut up," he hissed, his voice raspy. "No, I will not shut up," she screamed back, tears flying from her face as she stepped further into the room. "I do not know anything about predictive logistics. I do not know how to code. He used my name to open the bank accounts. He took all the money. He promised he would protect me." She turned to Richard, clasping her hands together in a desperate plea. "Please, Mr. Sterling, I am a victim here. He manipulated me. I will tell the authorities everything. I will give you the bank passwords. I will testify against him in court. Just please do not let them send me to prison." The foundation of nepotism and family loyalty collapsed into dust right in front of us. Bradley Pierce sat pinned in his chair, watching his own cousin eagerly volunteer to be the star witness for the prosecution in a desperate bid to save herself. The empire he had built on theft, lies, and intimidation was burning to the ground, and his own blood was striking the matches. The aftermath inside the boardroom was efficient and merciless. The chief executive officer waved a hand, a sharp, dismissive gesture that signaled the end of the interrogation. "Get them out of my sight," Richard ordered the security guards. "Confiscate their devices and escort them directly out of the building." Bradley did not struggle this time. He was hauled to his feet by the guards, his body limp and defeated. He cast one final hollow look toward the walnut table, staring at the evidence that had dismantled his life. Jessica followed closely behind him, guided by a female security officer, still sobbing loudly into a crumpled tissue. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind them, shutting off the sound of her crying and returning the boardroom to a strained, tense silence. Richard turned his attention back to me. He picked up a heavy Mont Blanc pen that rested near his notepad. He pulled the software licensing agreement across the table, the document Marcus had drafted, demanding $2 million annually for the rights to use Project Apex. "We have 15 minutes before the logistics partners arrive," Richard said, his voice steadying as he shifted his focus back to the immediate corporate survival crisis. "Ms. Hastings, I am signing this agreement under the stipulation that you will immediately authenticate the software architecture and remain in this room to personally conduct the demonstration alongside me." "That is acceptable," I replied. He unscrewed the cap of the pen and signed his name with a swift, decisive flourish at the bottom of the contract. He pushed the document back toward Marcus. Marcus reviewed the signature, nodded in satisfaction, and slipped the contract into his leather briefcase. The transaction was complete. I was no longer an employee fighting for a paycheck. I was an independent vendor who had just secured a multi-million-dollar revenue stream. I opened my laptop, pulling up the command terminal. I navigated through the encryption layers, executing the override protocol. I placed my finger against the biometric scanner. The system verified my identity with a soft chime. The 12-hour kill switch deactivated, and the complex logistical mapping interface of Project Apex flooded the screen, fully operational and ready to run. While I finalized the technical preparations, a far more visceral scene was unfolding outside the executive suite. The corporate grapevine operates with astonishing velocity. Word had spread rapidly across the various departments that a major security incident was occurring on the top floor. By the time Bradley Pierce was marched out of the boardroom, a crowd had gathered. 120 employees lined the central atrium and the ground floor lobby. These were the analysts, the marketing coordinators, and the mid-level managers who had logged into the morning broadcast. They were the people who had watched Bradley execute his power play, who had witnessed my public humiliation. Some had sent mocking text messages, eager to align themselves with the perceived victor. Most had simply remained silent, keeping their heads down out of fear for their own jobs. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a human corridor leading toward the main glass exit doors. The elevator doors pinged open on the ground floor. Bradley emerged, flanked tightly by two broad-shouldered security guards. He carried a small, flimsy cardboard box containing the sparse personal items security had allowed him to retrieve from his desk. A framed photograph, a generic coffee mug, a desk calendar. It was a pathetic accumulation for a man who had spent years cultivating an image of immense power and wealth. Jessica walked a few paces behind him, her head bowed her shoulders, shaking as she continued to weep. A third security officer guided her firmly toward the exit. The lobby fell into an absolute suffocating silence. No one whispered, no one pointed, no one pulled out a phone to record the moment. The silence was far more punishing than a chorus of jeers or applause. It was the heavy, judging quiet of a collective realization. The employees watched the vice president of operations, the man who had ruled through intimidation and stolen credit, being marched out in disgrace. The aura of invincibility that had shielded him was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a criminal escort. Bradley kept his eyes glued to the polished marble floor. He did not look left or right. He could feel the weight of 120 pairs of eyes tracking his every step. He passed Greg, the junior analyst who had cheered him on in the break room just hours ago. Greg stood rigidly, his face pale, actively avoiding eye contact with his former mentor. Bradley passed the reception desk where he had attempted to block Marcus and me from entering the elevators. Every step toward the exit was a public testament to his ruin. The security guards pushed open the heavy glass doors, escorting Bradley and Jessica out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The doors swung shut, sealing them outside. The crowd in the lobby remained silent for a long moment, processing the swift and brutal execution of corporate justice, before slowly dispersing back to their desks, the hierarchy of the office forever altered. Back in the boardroom, the demonstration with the logistics partners was a resounding success. Project Apex performed flawlessly, mapping predictive shipping routes that identified millions of dollars in potential savings. The partners were impressed. The $15 million contract renewal was verbally secured, and Richard Sterling breathed a visible sigh of relief. At 3:30, Marcus and I stepped out of the executive elevator into the now quiet lobby. The adrenaline of the morning had faded, leaving behind a sharp, clear sense of accomplishment. We walked toward the main exit, the same doors Bradley had been marched through. "We did good work today," Marcus noted, adjusting his grip on the briefcase holding the signed contract. "You built the leverage. I just helped you apply it." I offered a genuine smile. "I could not have navigated the legal framework without you, Marcus. Thank you." We stepped out onto the sidewalk. The afternoon air was cool and crisp. I was a free agent. I owned my software, I had secured my financial future, and I had eliminated the man who tried to destroy my career. I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a congratulatory text from Sarah, my sister, who knew the general outline of our plan. The caller identification displayed a name that instantly tightened the muscles in my neck. Sylvia, my mother. She had ignored my career for a decade, dismissing my work as trivial compared to the social maneuvering of people like Bradley and Jessica. She had told me to know my place and bow to a thief. But news travels fast in affluent circles, especially news involving the spectacular downfall of a prominent family member. Marcus noticed my hesitation. He glanced at the screen and raised an eyebrow. "The final boss," he murmured, recognizing the dynamic. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. The corporate battle was won, but the oldest, most toxic war of my life was still waiting to be fought. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear, stepping away from the bustling street traffic to face the woman who had spent 31 years telling me I was not enough. I stepped away from the bustling pedestrian traffic on the Seattle sidewalk and pressed the phone to my ear. The glass facade of the corporate headquarters reflected my image back to me. I looked at the tailored slate gray suit, the squared shoulders, the steady posture. I did not look like the daughter who used to shrink under the weight of parental expectations. I answered the call without offering a greeting. "Chloe, what on earth did you do?" My mother's voice did not hold a trace of maternal concern. It was a shrill, frantic frequency, echoing with panic and raw indignation. I stood watching a city bus roll past. I secured my intellectual property mother. I also saved the company from a disastrous software failure. It was a very productive afternoon. Productive. Sylvia hissed the word as if it were a disease. "Do you have any idea what is happening at the club right now? Patricia Pierce just called me in hysterics. She was hyperventilating so hard they had to bring her a glass of sugar water in the members' lounge. She said security dragged her nephew and her niece out of your building like common criminals. She said you orchestrated a witch hunt. Bradley and Jessica are criminals." "Mom," I stated, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "Bradley attempted to steal a proprietary algorithm I built. He also created a shell company to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from the corporate treasury. Jessica was the registered owner of that shell company. They stole company funds to finance their lifestyle. They were escorted out by security because the chief executive officer is handing their files over to federal investigators. The silence on the line was brief. A normal parent might express shock that their child had been targeted by a corporate thief. A normal parent might express relief that their child had emerged victorious and unscathed. Sylvia was not a normal parent. She processed the information through the singular, distorted lens of her social architecture. "I do not care about a few accounting errors," Sylvia snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "Do you understand who these people are?" The Pierce family sits on the board of the regional hospital. They chair the Autumn Charity Gala. I have spent 4 years cultivating a relationship with Patricia to get an invitation to the planning committee. We were supposed to play tennis this weekend. Now she is threatening to have our entire family blacklisted from the country club. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I listened to the traffic noise, the distant wail of an ambulance siren, the hum of the city. My mother was treating federal wire fraud as a minor faux pas that had inconveniently disrupted her tennis schedule. She viewed my career, my livelihood, and my intellectual property as entirely disposable if it meant securing a seat at a table with people who wore expensive jewelry. "You are worried about a tennis match?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register. "Your daughter was fired on a public broadcast this morning. I was humiliated in front of 120 people by a man who tried to ruin my future so he could buy a bigger house. And your primary concern is whether Patricia Pierce will still invite you to a charity dinner." "You are exaggerating as usual," Sylvia countered, employing the same dismissive tactic she had used since I was a child. "You always make yourself the victim, Chloe. Bradley is a senior executive. If he needed your little program for a presentation, you should have just given it to him. That is how the corporate world works. You play along, you show loyalty, and the executives reward you later. Instead, you threw a tantrum and ruined an innocent girl life. Jessica is 24 years old, and she signed documents to facilitate corporate embezzlement," I corrected her. "She is not an innocent girl. She is a willing accessory to a federal crime. She just made a mistake," Sylvia yelled, abandoning any pretense of composure. "She is a young woman from a good family. You cannot let them send her to prison over some computer code. You have to fix this, Chloe." "Fix what exactly?" "You need to call your boss right now," Sylvia ordered. Her tone was the exact demanding cadence she used to instruct service workers. "You tell him it was a huge misunderstanding. You tell him the money thing was an administrative error, and you permit them to use the software. You make them drop the police report against Jessica. Do it right now before Patricia ruins our reputation in this town." I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the building. I analyzed the demand my mother had just issued. She was instructing me to contact a chief executive officer who had just signed a $2 million licensing agreement with my name on it. She wanted me to lie to corporate counsel. She wanted me to commit perjury, obstruct a federal investigation, and forfeit a multi-million-dollar revenue stream, all to protect the people who had tried to destroy me. She wanted me to burn my own empire to the ground so she could keep her country club membership. The tragic reality of our relationship crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. There was no misunderstanding to resolve. There was no hidden depth of maternal love waiting to be uncovered. Sylvia saw me as a designated sacrifice. She had always viewed my achievements as irrelevant unless they could be leveraged for her social climbing. To her, I was not a person. I was a tool, and currently I was a malfunctioning tool that needed to be hammered back into place. "I am not calling the chief executive officer," I said. My voice was smooth, stripped of any anger, sadness, or hesitation. "I am not an employee of that company anymore, Mom. I am an independent vendor. I just sold the licensing rights to my software for $2 million a year." A breathless gasp echoed over the phone line. $2 million. Sylvia stammered the enormous financial figure, causing her social calculus to short-circuit. "Chloe, that is. Well, you can use that influence to help Jessica. If you have that much money, you can afford to be gracious. You can hire her a good defense lawyer." The sheer audacity of the request was breathtaking. She wanted me to finance the legal defense of the woman who had helped steal from me. It was a bottomless pit of entitlement. I took a slow, deep breath of the crisp Seattle air. The final frayed thread connecting me to the toxic expectations of my family dissolved into dust. "Mom," I said, maintaining that terrifying level calm, "my future was never your priority. You spent my entire life teaching me to make myself small so you could look bigger. You told me to bow to a thief. You asked me to protect my abusers to save your social calendar." "Chloe, do not speak to me in that tone," Sylvia warned, her voice trembling with indignation. "You owe us respect. We are your family. Family is not a blank check for abuse," I stated. "I am done seeking your approval. I am done shrinking myself to fit into your superficial world. Starting today, I do not need your validation. You can keep playing with your fake high society friends. You can comfort Patricia Pierce while her nephew goes to prison. That is your choice. But I am no longer participating in your game. You cannot just cut us off," Sylvia shrieked, the reality of the severance finally sinking in. "You are being selfish. Your father will be furious. We will come down to your apartment." "Do not bother," I replied. "The security at my new building is very strict. Goodbye, Mom." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait for her response. I tapped the red button ending the call. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I opened my contact list. I found my mother's name. I selected the option to block the caller. I performed the same action for my father. I severed the digital tethers, locking them out of my life permanently. I lowered the phone and looked back at Marcus. He had been standing a few feet away, granting me privacy, but close enough to read the shift in my posture. He held his leather briefcase in one hand, watching me with a quiet, discerning expression. He stepped forward. He did not ask what Sylvia had said. He did not offer unwanted advice about family dynamics. He understood the necessary brutality of cutting off diseased branches to save the tree. Marcus placed a steady, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Chloe," he said, his voice warm and grounded. "You protected your work in that boardroom, and you just protected your peace out here. That is a rare combination." I looked at my brother-in-law, the man who had handed me the legal framework to save my own life. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for his expertise, but for his genuine support. "Now," Marcus said, offering a small, victorious smile, "I believe we have a highly lucrative contract to celebrate. Let us go find a place that serves exceptional steak." I smiled back the tension, leaving my muscles entirely. "That sounds perfect." We turned away from the towering glass facade of the corporate headquarters. We walked down the busy sidewalk, merging into the flow of the city. I did not look back at the building where I had been humiliated, and I did not look back at the family that had tried to keep me chained to their expectations. I left the wreckage of Bradley Pierce's career and the ashes of my mother's social ambitions far behind me, stepping forward to build an empire that belonged entirely to me. 6 months passed. The events of that Monday morning did not fade into corporate obscurity. Instead, they solidified into an industry legend. The story of the vice president who fired his lead developer on a company broadcast only to be escorted out by security 20 minutes later became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across Seattle. The consequences for Bradley Pierce were systemic and devastating. The chief executive officer had made good on his threat. The dossier Marcus compiled was handed directly to the federal authorities. The subsequent investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation unraveled the entirety of Bradley financial architecture. The authorities discovered that the phantom invoices funneled into Apex Consulting LLC were just the surface layer of a deeper embezzlement scheme extending back to his previous employers. The Financial Crimes Division moved swiftly. They froze every asset attached to Bradley's name. His bank accounts, his investment portfolios, and the trust funds he had established were locked behind federal injunctions. The illusion of his immense wealth shattered overnight. The luxury vehicles were repossessed. The expensive country club memberships were revoked due to non-payment. When the extent of his criminal exposure became public record, the social fallout was brutal. His wife, a woman who had enjoyed the trappings of his ill-gotten executive salary, filed for divorce the same week the federal indictments were unsealed. She cited irreconcilable differences, but the reality was far more pragmatic. She discovered that their sprawling, 5-bedroom home in Bellevue was heavily leveraged and scheduled for foreclosure because Bradley had used it as collateral for loans connected to his shell companies. She took their 2 children and moved back to her parents' estate in Oregon, leaving Bradley to face the legal ruin alone. Finding new employment was an impossibility. The tech industry in the Pacific Northwest was a tight-knit community. A basic background check revealed his termination for cause, and a simple web search displayed ongoing federal litigation for wire fraud and cyber intrusion. He was a radioactive asset. The man who had threatened to ensure I never touched another dataset was now unemployable, blacklisted from the very industry he once thought he ruled. Jessica Pierce faced her own reckoning. The survival instinct that prompted her to turn state evidence against her cousin did not grant her total immunity. Ignorance of the law is rarely a valid defense, especially when your signature is on the incorporation documents of a fraudulent entity. She stood before a federal judge in a muted gray suit, weeping as the prosecution detailed her role as the registered agent for the shell company. She accepted a plea deal to avoid federal prison. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of strict probation and 500 hours of community service. The terms of her probation included a mandatory financial literacy course and a strict prohibition against holding any fiduciary position in a corporate entity. The designer handbags and the imaginary title of strategic advisor were gone, replaced by the humbling reality of court-mandated community service cleaning municipal parks. The ripple effects extended far beyond the perpetrators of the fraud. The social collateral damage hit my mother Sylvia with devastating precision. The elite social circles she had spent decades attempting to infiltrate operated on a rigid code of optics. When the Pierce family became the center of a federal embezzlement scandal, their social standing plummeted. Patricia Pierce, Jessica's mother, became a pariah at the country club. The whispers and judgmental stares drove her away from the charity galas and the tennis matches. In her desperation to deflect the shame, Patricia turned her venom outward. She blamed everyone else for her family downfall, and her primary target became my mother. Patricia told anyone who would listen that my mother had raised a vindictive, ruthless daughter who had orchestrated the entire scandal to ruin her innocent nephew and niece. The wealthy friends Sylvia had tried so hard to impress swiftly distanced themselves. They did not want to be associated with the messy public feud between the two families. The invitations to luncheons stopped arriving. The holiday cards were not sent. Sylvia found herself isolated, exiled from the gated communities and the high society events she prized above all else. She lost the superficial connections she had prioritized over her own daughter, finding out too late that conditional acceptance evaporates the moment you become a liability. The junior analysts and mid-level managers who had sent me mocking text messages faced a quieter but no less profound correction. Greg, the analyst who had joked about me coding my way out of a pink slip, was called into human resources the following week. The company conducted a thorough internal review of Bradley Department to root out any remaining corruption. Greg was not involved in the embezzlement, but the review uncovered a significant pattern of his underperformance, masked by his constant sycophancy toward Bradley. Without his protector, Greg's lack of actual analytical skill was glaringly obvious. He was placed on a rigid performance improvement plan and subsequently let go 2 months later when he failed to meet the basic metrics of his role. The corporate ecosystem had cleansed itself. The toxic elements were excised not by a petty desire for vengeance, but by the relentless illuminating power of the truth and the unyielding structure of the law. I did not have to actively destroy anyone. I simply secured my boundaries, presented the facts, and allowed their own corrupt actions to dictate their downfall. I spent those 6 months building the foundation of my new reality. The $2 million annual licensing fee provided an incredible safety net, but I did not stop working. I utilized the capital to establish my own independent consulting firm, focusing on advanced predictive modeling for complex supply chains. I hired a small elite team of developers, offering them equitable pay and a toxic-free work environment. We operated out of a sleek, minimalist office space overlooking Puget Sound. My life was quiet, productive, and entirely under my own control. I maintained regular contact with Marcus and my sister Sarah. They were the family I chose, the people who demonstrated their loyalty through action rather than demanding it through guilt. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November, I was sitting in my new office reviewing the architecture for an updated version of the Apex algorithm. The system was running smoothly, processing millions of data points flawlessly. My computer chimed, indicating an incoming email on my secure business account. I glanced at the screen. The sender domain belonged to Horizon Logistics, the largest global supply chain conglomerate in North America, and the primary competitor to the company Bradley had nearly ruined. I opened the message expecting a standard inquiry for consulting services. The email was from the Chief Technology Officer of Horizon Logistics. The tone was direct, bypassing traditional corporate pleasantries. Ms. Hastings, the email began. We have been closely following the implementation of your predictive modeling software at your former employer. The efficiency gains are unprecedented in this sector. Our analytics team has reviewed the available metrics, and we believe your algorithm is the missing component in our global infrastructure. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the text. They were not asking me to consult. They were not asking to license the software. The email continued. Horizon Logistics is prepared to bypass standard procurement channels. We are offering to acquire the sole exclusive rights and ownership of the Project Apex source code. Our initial acquisition offer is $25 million. We are prepared to commence legal and technical due diligence immediately upon your agreement. I stared at the number on the screen. $25 million. It was a figure that altered the trajectory of a lifetime. It was the kind of capital that built generational wealth. It was the ultimate validation of the late nights, the stress, and the sheer relentless determination to protect what I had built. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Marcus' name. I initiated the call, watching the rain streak down the large glass windows of my office. A new horizon was opening, vast and entirely mine to conquer. The rain beat a steady rhythmic pattern against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. I sat in a high-backed ergonomic chair looking out over the sprawling Seattle skyline. The gray clouds hung low over the city, but inside my suite, the environment was warm, quiet, and entirely under my jurisdiction. I was no longer the invisible data analyst hunched over a keyboard in a glass fishbowl, waiting for permission to speak. I was the chief executive officer of my own technology firm. I owned the building lease. I signed the paychecks. I dictated the rules of engagement. The transition from a terminated employee to a corporate founder had required a fundamental rewiring of my internal architecture. For 31 years, I had operated under a flawed assumption. I believed that if I kept my head down, produced exceptional work, and never complained, the world would eventually recognize my worth. I had embraced the role of the silent cleaner. In my family, I absorbed my mother's sharp criticisms and smoothed over the awkward tensions, acting as the designated emotional sponge. In the workplace, I built the predictive models, generated the revenue, and allowed men like Bradley to stand on my shoulders to reach the podium. I had operated as the perfect compliant scapegoat, assuming that sacrifice was the currency of respect. I was wrong. Sacrifice without boundaries is just an invitation for exploitation. Marcus had taught me that crucial lesson during the grueling weeks of legal due diligence that followed the acquisition offer from Horizon Logistics. When the $25 million buyout was placed on the table, my initial instinct had been to hesitate to question if I was asking for too much, to worry about how the industry might perceive a sudden aggressive demand for capital. Marcus had sat across from me in a sterile conference room at his law firm, closing his laptop and looking at me with that signature, unyielding intensity. Corporate America does not reward martyrs, Chloe Marcus had said, his voice a low, steady rumble. It rewards architects. You built a structural asset that solves a billion-dollar logistics problem. They are not doing you a favor by offering to buy it. They are attempting to acquire a weapon before their competitors do. Do not negotiate from a place of gratitude. Negotiate from a position of power. Your value is not determined by how much you suffer to create something. Your value is determined by the iron walls you build around your creation. I absorbed his words, letting them dismantle the last remnants of my subservient conditioning. I stopped apologizing for my brilliance. I stopped shrinking to accommodate the fragile egos of the people around me. I hired Marcus' law firm on retainer, and together we stripped the Horizon Logistics contract down to the studs, renegotiating every clause, every liability waiver, and every intellectual property transfer protocol. We secured a deal that did not just purchase the source code, but guaranteed my consulting firm an ongoing advisory retainer for the software implementation across their global network. The corporate battlefield had forged me into a weapon, but the psychological victory extended far beyond my bank accounts. I thought about my mother, Sylvia, isolated in her suburban home, clinging to the fading memories of her country club status. I used to crave her validation. I used to mold my decisions around her superficial expectations, hoping to earn a fleeting moment of maternal pride. When she demanded I protect Bradley to save her social standing, she handed me the key to my own cage. By refusing her demand, I stopped fighting a war I was never meant to win. I realized that toxic family dynamics operate on the same mechanics as corrupt corporate structures. They rely on your fear of exile to keep you compliant. The moment you accept the exile, their power evaporates. The public humiliation on the video broadcast, the digital lockout at 5 in the morning, the agonizing family dinners filled with subtle insults. None of these events defined me anymore. They were simply stress tests. They were the crucible required to burn away the naive, accommodating version of myself. Bradley Pierce thought he was burying my career. Sylvia thought she was putting me in my place. They did not realize they were providing the exact friction necessary to spark a wildfire. I turned my attention away from the rainy cityscape and looked at the dual monitors resting on my minimalist oak desk. My email inbox was clean organized and managed by an executive assistant who intercepted any unauthorized communication. My calendar was dictated by my own strategic priorities. A gentle melodic chime sounded from the desktop speakers. A notification banner slid into view on the bottom right corner of the screen. It was an automated alert from my primary commercial banking institution. I moved the mouse clicking on the secure notification. The browser routed me to the encrypted portal. I utilized my biometric scanner to authenticate the login. The dashboard loaded, displaying the current status of my corporate holding account. The pending transaction that had been undergoing federal clearing for the past 48 hours had updated its status. The text changed from processing to cleared. The line item displayed the routing information from the financial division of Horizon Logistics. Below it, in crisp, undeniable black text, was the final acquisition deposit. $25 million. I did not scream. I did not jump out of my chair. I simply sat there observing the numerical validation of my autonomy. The money was not just wealth, it was armor. It was a fortress built of capital, ensuring that no executive, no relative, and no toxic institution could ever dictate my trajectory again. I owned my time. I owned my expertise. I owned my future. I reached for the ceramic mug resting on a cork coaster near my keyboard. The dark roast coffee was still warm. I brought the rim to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the bitter, earthy flavor ground me in the present moment. I looked directly at the camera mounted above my monitor, visualizing the millions of people who have ever felt crushed under the weight of an abusive boss or a manipulative family member. I thought about the silent workers, the unseen architects, and the perpetual scapegoats who are waiting for permission to fight back. You cannot force toxic people to respect you through kindness. I said, my voice echoing evenly in the quiet, expansive office. You can only force them to respect you through the terms of a contract. Boundaries are not meant to keep love out. Boundaries are meant to filter out the people who want to exploit you. Remember that. I set the coffee mug down. I closed the banking portal, the glowing screen fading to a deep, resonant black. The storm raged outside the glass, but inside my empire, the foundation was unbreakable. Looking back at that fateful Monday morning, the attempted execution on the live video broadcast feels like a lifetime ago. I sit in my own office now, watching the Seattle rain wash the glass, and I realize I do not harbor any lingering anger. Anger requires sustained, exhausting energy, and I prefer to channel my resources into expanding my business. The wreckage. Bradley Pierce and my mother Sylvia left in their wake was entirely their own doing. I simply refused to remain their collateral damage. Surviving that high-stakes corporate battlefield and dismantling my toxic family structure taught me 3 fundamental truths that reshaped my entire existence. First, your silence is your most lethal asset. When a predator attempts to corner you, they anticipate panic. They want you to beg to argue and to negotiate from a place of profound fear. Refuse to provide them that satisfaction. When you withhold your reaction, you shift the psychological burden onto them, forcing them to negotiate against their own escalating terror. Let them talk themselves into an inescapable trap while you quietly and methodically gather your irrefutable evidence. Second, loyalty is a mutual contract even within your own bloodline. Society conditions us to believe that family demands unconditional sacrifice. That narrative is a manipulative tool designed to keep you compliant. If your relatives only appreciate you when you shrink yourself to accommodate their fragile egos or their superficial social ambitions, they do not genuinely love you. They merely love the convenience of your quiet obedience. Severing ties with toxic biology is never a betrayal. It is an urgent, necessary act of self-preservation. Third, your true worth has zero correlation with how much abuse you can endure. For a decade, I operated under the delusion that working grueling hours and swallowing unearned insults made me a dedicated professional. I falsely equated suffering with value. True power originates from identifying your unique capability and constructing an impenetrable legal and emotional fortress around it. You instruct the world on how to treat you by the boundaries you refuse to compromise. I walked out of that marble corporate lobby with my dignity intact, my intellectual property secured, and my financial future permanently guaranteed. You possess that exact same structural strength inside you right now. You just have to stop waiting for someone else to grant you permission to wield it. Stand tall, document every transgression, and ruthlessly reclaim your own narrative. If my journey resonated with your own experiences today, or if you are currently preparing to draw your own definitive line in the sand against those who underestimate you, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Hazel Tells Stories for more empowering narratives about outsmarting toxic environments and rewriting the rules of the game. You deserve to be the sole architect of your own life. I will see